In the 19th century, death did not knock. It erupted. A man stands at his workbench. His hands are steady. His breath is normal. Hours later, his body convulses violently. His skin turns pale, then yellow, then dark. And before the final breath leaves him, a thick black fluid pours from his mouth. Slow, tar-like, unmistakable. They called it black vomit. To those who witnessed it, this was not an illness. It looked like corruption rising from inside the body itself, like something ancient, punitive, unnatural. Entire households vanished in days. Streets emptied overnight. Church bells rang so often they lost their meaning. No one knew why it happened. Doctors argued in candlelit rooms. Some blamed poisoned air. Others blamed sin. Many blamed the victims themselves. And while cities expanded and ships crossed oceans faster than ever before, this unseen killer traveled with them, port to port, river to river, city to city. The black vomit epidemic struck at the very heart of modern confidence. At a time when humanity believed it was mastering nature, nature answered, violently. This was not a single outbreak. It was a recurring nightmare that haunted the 1800s, reshaped medicine, and forced the world to confront a terrifying truth. Progress without understanding can be deadly. Stay with us, because to understand how this horror began, we must go back to the world that unknowingly invited it inside. If you're enjoying this journey through time, remember to like the video and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Before the black vomit had a name, the world had already prepared the stage for it. The 1800s were an age of movement. People flooded into cities faster than cities could grow. London, New Orleans, Havana, Rio de Janeiro. Ports swelled with sailors, migrants, merchants, and the invisible passengers they carried with them. Streets narrowed. Homes stacked upward. Waste piled where people slept. Water was everywhere, and clean water was almost nowhere. Most cities relied on shallow wells, open cisterns, and rivers that served two purposes at once: drinking and disposal. Human waste, animal remains, industrial runoff, all flowed together, unseen beneath the surface. What looked clear could still carry death, yet few believed water could betray them. Disease, according to most 19th century doctors, traveled through the air. Bad smells meant bad health. This idea, known as miasma theory, shaped everything from hospital design to city planning. Authorities focused on odors, not microbes. Windows were opened, perfumes were burned, but the water remained untouched. At the same time, global trade was accelerating. Ships crossed oceans on fixed schedules. Steam power shortened journeys that once took months. Cargo moved faster. So did disease. A fever that began in the tropics could reach a northern port before symptoms even appeared. Yellow fever, cholera, dysentery. Different diseases, different origins, but often the same terrifying ending. Black vomit was not a disease itself. It was a symptom, a sign of catastrophic internal failure, most famously associated with severe yellow fever. The liver collapsed. Internal bleeding followed. Blood mixed with stomach acids, darkening as it rose. When it appeared, death usually followed within hours. Communities learned to fear that moment. In port cities, the pattern repeated relentlessly. A ship arrived. Sailors fell ill days later. Dock workers followed. Then families. Then entire neighborhoods. Quarantines were declared too late, or not at all. Commerce was rarely stopped. Trade mattered more than caution. Hospitals offered little comfort. Many were overcrowded, underfunded, and poorly understood. Doctors reused instruments without cleaning them. Treatments ranged from bloodletting to mercury compounds. Patients weakened faster than they healed. And still, the cause remained invisible. Governments faced an impossible choice: acknowledge the outbreaks and risk economic collapse, or deny them and hope they passed quietly. Most chose silence. Newspapers downplayed deaths. Officials changed terminology. Yellow fever became seasonal illness. Cholera became digestive trouble. But the dead told a different story, one written in mass graves and midnight burials. Fear reshaped daily life. People avoided strangers. Families fled cities at the first rumor of sickness. Those who could afford it escaped to the countryside. Those who couldn't stayed behind, trapped in heat, filth, and uncertainty. And yet, despite the terror, something else was happening. A small number of observers began to notice patterns. Outbreaks followed water sources. Neighborhoods sharing wells suffered together. Ships arriving from certain regions carried death more often than others. These observations challenged everything medicine thought it knew. The black vomit epidemics were not only a biological disaster, they were a crisis of knowledge. Humanity was moving faster than its understanding, and nature, silent and unseen, was keeping pace. In the next part, we step closer to the disease itself, to the streets where it struck hardest, and to the people who watched helplessly as the world they trusted began to fail. When the epidemic arrived, it rarely announced itself. There was no single moment of impact, only a slow realization that something was terribly wrong. It often began with fever, a headache, chills, weakness, symptoms so common they were easy to dismiss. Men continued working. Women continued caring for children. Ships kept unloading cargo. Life moved forward until it suddenly didn't. Within days, the fever intensified. Eyes yellowed, skin burned. Vomiting began. In severe cases, the liver failed entirely. Blood seeped internally, pooling in the stomach. And then came the sign everyone feared: black vomit. Witnesses described it as thick, dark, and relentless. Once it appeared, hope vanished. Doctors knew the pattern well enough to recognize the end, even if they couldn't stop it. Many stopped treatment altogether, offering only comfort or isolation. Cities like New Orleans, Havana, Philadelphia, and Rio de Janeiro became recurring stages for this horror. Hot climates worsened outbreaks, but heat alone was not the cause. The disease returned season after season, feeding on crowded housing, stagnant water, and constant movement of people. Quarantine was the primary defense. Ports raised yellow flags. Ships were held offshore for days or weeks. Cargo rotted. Sailors grew desperate. Merchants protested. And still, the disease slipped through. Sometimes the sick showed no symptoms until it was too late. Inside the cities, daily life fractured. Markets emptied. Schools closed. Funerals multiplied so quickly they blurred together. Coffins ran out. In some outbreaks, bodies were buried within hours, without ceremony, without family, without names. Fear rewrote social order. The wealthy fled first. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned. Those left behind were often the poor, the enslaved, the newly arrived, people with nowhere else to go. Mortality rates reflected this imbalance brutally. In some epidemics, entire communities were erased. Doctors worked under impossible conditions. They argued fiercely among themselves. Some insisted the disease spread from person to person. Others swore it rose from rotting matter in the streets. Treatments contradicted one another. Bloodletting weakened patients already hemorrhaging internally. Quinine helped some fevers, but did nothing for others. Nothing stopped the black vomit once it began. Nurses and caregivers faced a cruel dilemma. To help the sick meant risking their own lives. Many chose to stay anyway. Others fled. Hospitals became places of desperation, not healing. Yet within the chaos, patterns were forming. Certain districts were always hit harder. Houses near docks, streets with poor drainage, neighborhoods sharing the same wells. Entire blocks fell ill together, while others nearby remained untouched. These inconsistencies raised uncomfortable questions. If bad air was the cause, why did disease respect invisible boundaries? The epidemics exposed not only medical ignorance, but political fear. Officials delayed announcements. Death counts were altered. Public confidence mattered more than public safety. Commerce continued even as bodies accumulated. But denial had consequences. Each outbreak returned stronger, more feared, and more disruptive than the last. Cities could not grow fast enough to escape their own filth. Expansion only widened the pathways for disease. And slowly, painfully, some began to accept the unthinkable. That the enemy was not the air, but something far closer. Something people consumed every day without question. Water. The black vomit epidemics were forcing humanity toward a reckoning. A moment when belief would collide with evidence. Tradition with observation, authority with truth. In the next part, that collision becomes unavoidable, as a handful of individuals challenge the foundations of medicine itself, and the cost of being wrong grows too high to ignore. The epidemics did not end suddenly. They hesitated. Between waves of death, something changed. Not in the streets, but in the minds of a few observers who refused to accept old explanations. They did not deny the horror. They studied it. They counted. Instead of asking what did the air smell like, they asked where did the sick live, what water did they drink, which streets were spared, and why. In the 1850s, during one of the deadliest cholera outbreaks in London, a physician named John Snow did something radical. He ignored the air. He mapped the dead. House by house, death by death. Snow traced patterns others had missed. The bodies clustered around a single source, a public water pump on Broad Street. People who drank from it fell ill. Those who didn't, often by coincidence, survived. When the pump handle was removed, the outbreak slowed. It was a small act. Its implications were enormous. Snow's conclusions challenged decades of medical doctrine. He argued that disease traveled through contaminated water, not poisonous air. That something invisible, too small to see, was responsible. At the time, there was no germ theory to support him. Many dismissed his work as coincidence, but the evidence kept accumulating. Elsewhere, similar observations emerged. Cities that improved water supplies saw fewer outbreaks. Neighborhoods with new sewers recovered faster. Outbreaks followed rivers downstream, not wind patterns. Slowly, reluctantly, the old explanations began to fracture. Yellow fever, long associated with black vomit, remained more complex. Its transmission, later linked to mosquitoes, was still misunderstood. But even here, patterns defied miasma theory. Clean streets did not guarantee safety. Fresh air did not prevent outbreaks. Something else was at work. The struggle was not just scientific, it was political. Accepting waterborne disease meant accepting responsibility. Cities would need massive infrastructure changes, sewers, filtration, regulation. These projects were expensive, disruptive, and slow. Admitting the truth meant admitting failure. Some governments resisted, others experimented quietly. Results spoke louder than speeches. By the late 1800s, a new understanding was forming. Germ theory gained ground. Microscopes revealed a hidden world teeming with life and danger. Disease was no longer a mystery sent by the heavens. It was a consequence of human systems interacting with nature. The black vomit epidemics became a turning point, not because they were the deadliest, but because they forced humanity to see what it had refused to see before. Progress without sanitation was an illusion. Growth without knowledge was a gamble. Medicine began to change, cities began to change, and for the first time, prevention became as important as treatment. Clean water was no longer a luxury, it was survival. Yet, this transformation came at a cost measured in millions of lives. Every discovery was paid for in suffering. Every insight arrived too late for those already buried. In the next part, we witness the aftermath, how cities rebuilt, how public health was born, and how the memory of black vomit faded, even as its lessons remained. When the epidemics finally loosened their grip, they did not leave relief behind. They left questions. Cities emerged from each outbreak changed, quieter, poorer, and painfully aware of their own fragility. Entire generations had watched neighbors die in days. The memory of black vomit lingered long after the bodies were gone, shaping how people thought about streets, water, and the unseen forces beneath daily life. Reform did not come from compassion alone. It came from fear. Merchants had lost fortunes. Governments had lost credibility. Armies had lost soldiers without ever facing an enemy. Disease had proven it could cripple empires without firing a shot. Slowly, cities began to rebuild, not upward, but downward. In places like London, engineers tore open streets to lay massive underground sewer systems. Rivers were rerouted. Waste was pushed away from drinking sources. What had once been invisible filth became a central concern of urban planning. These projects were monumental. They disrupted daily life for years. Entire neighborhoods were demolished. Workers labored underground in darkness, heat, and disease of their own. Many died building the systems meant to save others. But the results were undeniable. Areas with improved sanitation saw dramatic declines in epidemic deaths. Outbreaks still occurred, but they lost their explosive force. Black vomit became rarer. Seasonal terror slowly gave way to cautious confidence. In Paris, vast sewer networks transformed the relationship between the city and its waste. Water systems became regulated. Filtration improved. Clean water was no longer assumed. It was engineered. Public health emerged as a new responsibility of the state. Health boards were formed. Deaths were recorded more carefully. Statistics replaced superstition. Patterns were tracked, not ignored. For the first time, governments accepted that preventing disease was not an act of charity, but of survival. Medicine followed. Hospitals adopted cleaner practices. Instruments were washed. Isolation wards were designed with purpose. The idea that caregivers themselves could spread disease forced a reckoning within the profession. The black vomit epidemics had taught a brutal lesson. Good intentions were not enough, yet reform was uneven. Colonial cities lagged behind. Poorer districts received improvements last. Inequality remained written into the infrastructure itself. Clean water flowed first to those with power and last to those without. Still, the direction was set. By the end of the 19th century, the world had crossed a threshold. Disease was no longer solely a personal misfortune or moral failing. It was a systems problem, a consequence of design, neglect, and decision-making. And with that realization came a quieter shift. Fear began to fade. The sight of black vomit no longer haunted every summer. Quarantines became targeted, not desperate. Cities dared to believe they could coexist with the forces that once destroyed them. But memory is fragile. As epidemics retreated, so did urgency. New generations grew up without witnessing the horror firsthand. The lessons once carved into streets and graves risked becoming abstractions. Which leads us to the final question. What happens when humanity forgets why these systems were built? When confidence returns faster than humility? In the final part, we look at the legacy of the black vomit epidemics and why their warning still matters in the modern world. By the time the black vomit epidemics faded from public memory, the world believed it had moved on. Water flowed through pipes instead of streets. Waste disappeared underground. Cities grew taller, cleaner, more confident. The horrors of the 1800s became historical footnotes, names in medical texts, dates in dusty ledgers. But the enemy never vanished. It changed form. The true legacy of the black vomit epidemics is not the disease itself, but the realization they forced upon humanity. The most dangerous threats are often invisible, and the systems meant to protect us can also betray us. Modern public health was born from this understanding. Sanitation, surveillance, vaccination, and regulation did not emerge from optimism, but from fear earned the hard way. Every clean glass of water carries the memory of cities that once drank death without knowing it. Yet progress brings its own illusions. As the world became more connected than ever, the same forces that spread disease in the 1800s intensified again. Global travel compresses time. Urban density multiplies risk. A single breakdown, one contaminated source, one missed warning, can ripple outward with astonishing speed. The black vomit epidemics remind us that confidence is fragile, that science must be maintained, not assumed, that infrastructure is not permanent. It requires vigilance. They also reveal something deeply human. In every epidemic, fear exposes inequality. Those with resources escape first. Those without endure the longest. This pattern has not changed. The diseases differ, but the social fractures remain hauntingly familiar. What saved the 19th century was not heroism alone. It was humility, the willingness to admit ignorance, to challenge authority, to rebuild entire cities around uncomfortable truths. The black vomit was a message written in suffering. Progress without understanding is not progress at all. And so its legacy lives on, not in the streets that once echoed with funeral carts, but in every decision we make about how we share space, water, and responsibility in a crowded world. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it remembers. And sometimes it waits. The streets are quiet now, the wells are sealed, the pipes hum softly beneath the ground, carrying water we no longer fear. But the silence of safety was not always here. It was built from loss, from cities that learned too late, from bodies that became data, and grief that became knowledge. The black vomit epidemics remind us that civilization is not defined by how high it builds, but by how carefully it listens to the warnings beneath its feet. Every modern safeguard carries the echo of a time when humanity mistook confidence for control. We live surrounded by systems born from tragedy, often unaware of the cost that shaped them. And history asks only one thing in return: that we remember why they exist. If this journey through the past moved you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe so you don't miss the next era we explore together. Because the past is never truly gone. It watches. It waits. The moment fades, but its meaning remains. This is Old World View.